Hello and welcome to another episode of the PMC podcast, where PMC stands for Project Management Conversations. Today, we have a very special guest, Kevin Korterud, who brings over 19 years of experience in leading complex global programs with proven expertise in agile, hybrid, cloud migrations, portfolio management, you name it, ranging from petro and gas to financial services and even federal law enforcement. So, Kevin has been a key figure in shaping high performance project and program delivery, applying various methodologies, as I mentioned, from agile to waterfall and everything in between. It's truly an honor to have you on the show today, Kevin. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, right? And Friday came all too quick, but I'm so glad to be here on a Friday. So,
Awesome. So now our podcast is named Project Management Conversations, and there really cannot be a conversation around project management without the mention of James Snyder. I'd like to briefly honor the memory of James R. Snyder, one of the founding members of Project Management Institute, PMI, and he's known as the father of PMI based on the PMI website themselves. And James helped establish the organization in 1969, shaping project management into the profession that it today is. He served as PMI's first executive director and played key roles throughout the organization's growth. It included overseeing the construction of PMI's global headquarters as well. And his legacy continues to influence project managers worldwide. And we remember him for his vision, leadership, and dedication to the profession. Now, Kevin recently shared a thoughtful tribute to James, reflecting on his legacy and contributions to project management. So I reached out to Kevin and asked if he could share some of the lessons he learned from the PMI co-founder. And Kevin graciously agreed to join us today. So to begin with, Kevin, could you share a bit about your personal connection with James and how he influenced your career?
absolutely. So, I'm very fortunate over the course of I'm going to move my camera here just a scotch. There we go. Over the course of over 4 decades now of working in technology, to do a lot of great projects and meet a lot of great people. And I found out I was going to be doing a presentation at a project management day at one of our clients. And I literally almost fell over in fear because the person before me was actually going to be James Snyder, right? One of the founders of PMI and its first executive director. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do, right? I mean, how am I going to follow this guy? Just, because he's probably forgotten more about project management than a lot of us know. But James was very friendly, very thoughtful. And before we went out, and I think I did actually 2 different sessions with James on at 2 different locations. But before we went out, I actually talked to James a little bit about the trajectory of project management over the years because he was doing the history of project management. I was doing project management futures, and we are showing
Wow.
how there's a lot of things that are the same. There's some things that are different, right? Which I'll actually
Mhm.
highlight a little bit of that here when we talk. But yeah, it was a really great conversation. And ironically, small little bit of trivia. I was working at a client assignment in New Orleans, and on the way from my hotel to the client site, I used to walk by this hotel. It's kind of an older hotel. I can't think of the name of it in New Orleans. And I was talking to James about that, and he goes, "Well, the room there right on the corner, that's where we actually had one of the first ever PMI meetings." So
Wow.
I was walking by, right, kind of the spiritual birthplace of PMI. I didn't
Wow.
even know it. So yeah,
Awesome.
that was
Awesome.
it. James is just so like I said, he's just so rich, but he's always very thoughtful and was very open about sharing things with me. And actually in the article, he talked about 3 things, which I can go ahead and
Hmm.
share as we have our conversation. So
Yeah, we'll discuss all that. We'll talk about project management a lot, but um, James, being one of the original founders of PMI, this is an organization that has become central to our profession. So
mhm.
before we go to project management side of things, I would also like to understand like what were some of his thoughts on PMI and how PMI has evolved since its early days.
Oh, absolutely. We actually talked about that a bit, right? So when
Mhm.
James and I started, right, because I was back, I won't even say, I think Abraham Lincoln was doing coding back when I started, right? But we talked about the days of having to literally make the stuff up as we went along because there was lots of, you think about it, probably a great analogy for this, and this actually works with my oil and gas clients quite a bit. When you used to build like a refinery or even better, like a hospital, right? You would say, okay, we're going to have so many rooms. It's going to be this tall. It's got to support so many patients. And today, when you build a hospital, and I've got a good friend of mine that's actually he does a lot of capital projects, and a lot of them are like hospitals, kind of like all over the globe. He said, Kev, yeah, we don't do that anymore. We build the data center, and then we build the hospital around it, which I thought was really intriguing. And James and I actually talked about that. And he said, yeah, when we first started out, there was elements of technology, but it was very kind of simple, right? COBOL, and you produce reports, or you have old green screens and stuff like this. It was mechanically easier because technology was not in everything. And today, we had a bit of a chuckle because we were talking about, what is a business project? I've had some clients tell me, yeah, well, this is a business project. And I'm like, what is that? Right? You've got technology in like God knows just about everything. And so that's where PMI really started to come into form because it produced at least a road, especially for folks entering the project journey. What structured way to go about doing this? I mean, there's some stuff that existed, some scholarly work that's been done, and massive capital projects and like all this, but there really wasn't a structured road that was put together in the project management space, right? So yeah, James was very instrumental in paving that road for a lot of us.
Right. And the kind of environment that you're mentioning here is drastically different around project management than what it is today. We have
Oh
technology
yeah,
for everything. We can, use nifty little tools that does a lot of stuff for us that might have been required manual efforts back then, uh, in just project planning itself. So do you think the environment that he was operating in that shaped his approach to project management?
I think it did over the years, Shades,
Mhm.
because when we started out, projects were kind of like I have to make up a bunch of software code programs,
Mm.
and I got to produce reports, I got to do screens, like all this. And if you look back in the history of like project management offices, going back to like Kelly Johnson of the Skunk Works at Lockheed, right? Kelly actually was back in the 40s, figured out, you had to have a PMO and you had to have project management if aircraft companies were
Mm.
going to make more aircraft, more than one aircraft at once, right? So he was really instrumental in that. And I think what's happened over time, and this is an interesting kind of model, right? When I started out on projects, you were able to put everybody on the project in a room
Mm.
because you didn't have much in the way of external dependencies,
Right.
right? You were working on big mainframes,
Right.
and everything goes on one central place, and everybody was in, kind of there, and you could bring in the folks from accounting or like whatever and what have you. And what's happened over the years, and James and I did talk about this a bunch, is the quantity and depth of external dependencies, especially technology dependencies, is like
Mhm.
going through the roof. So, great example of this that I shared with James. I had an airline client, and they had a list of all their projects, and they said, "Well, these are like business projects." And I said, "There's no technology in there," and they were like, "Well, yes, yeah, it does have technology." And out of 105 projects, we figured out the only project that didn't have any technology in it was replacing the chairs at a ticket counter in Africa. Right? It's like, okay, well, the chairs might actually be automated, right? You just never know.
So,
They
mm.
might have Internet of Things in them or something like that. But yeah, it's just the landscape has dramatically changed. So it's harder, I think, for project managers today, just because of all the external dependencies and so
Right.
much of the
Mm.
dirt road has been paved over. Yeah, James and I talked about that at length. But I think project managers today actually have it mechanically harder than like when
Mm.
James and I started.
Okay. Now, coming to your article, right? One of the first key points that you mentioned there is the importance of organic thinking. Could you
Yes.
elaborate on this mindset of, problem solving without tools or uh, rigid structures that can still be applied in, let's say, today's technical project management environment?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Right. So, by the way, this is one of I've written for PMI on and off over probably like 6, 7 years. This is actually one of the hardest articles I've ever had to write because there
Mhm.
was so much to go on, right? And I want to make sure I kind of, help represent, I think James's contribution to PMI and the project management industry over the years. But, the thing that never really goes away, right, is the ability to apply organic thinking to
Mm.
situations because problems are always going to come up, right? They always do. And, in particular, things always happen. And we're finding one of the hardest things these days, right, is actually we're spending more time on resource management,
Mm.
particularly with the business folks, right? Because a lot of them have like day jobs and stuff. But
Right.
things always come up, right? And you just have to be very organic and kind of think, okay, I've got these multiple things. How do I juggle them and all this? Where, back in the day, all James and I had to do was just kind of like manage software code, and
Mm.
that was it. So it's become more, mechanically complex, especially with external dependencies. So I think of, project managers can like read books and say, okay, I followed this method and like here it is. But there was a guy, aviation writer, Ernie Gahn, a number of years back, said rule books are made of paper. They don't keep you
Mm.
from flying in mountains, right? So
Wow.
it's always kind of think organically and look for all the things that could potentially happen, particularly around external dependencies. But yeah,
So good.
that is, I think project managers really have to have.
So good. One of the things that you also mentioned in the article was how James believed that experience is a great teacher. I'd like to focus a bit in your towards your own career, right? So, in your career, are there, some of the tough projects or some tough situations that taught you the most as project managers? In fact, it would be great if you could elaborate on any one of them.
Absolutely. I'll maybe offer like two or three up here, but I'm always suspicious when I go look at a project manager join a team, that's never experienced a turnaround or had a delay or anything like that. It's kind of like, it just seems like that's, that's the norm that we have to like work through those things. But, I've been fortunate. I've worked with a lot of great people. I've worked with a lot of great projects. And what made the projects great sometimes was actually turning them around, right? Where somebody came in, was overly admissive and said, oh, yeah, that won't take too long without actually knowing the numbers or estimates or forecasts or like whatever. But yeah, experience is a good teacher. And I like people that have gone through, a bit of the Homer's Odyssey, so to speak, and maybe wandered the landscape trying to figure out how to get out of this problem or something. But those are the folks that always seem to have, they have they build the character, so to speak,
Mm.
that when something comes up, you're not going to panic. You're just going to go, okay, we're going to kind of like work our way through this. And it's just an interesting dynamic. I had very early on a project manager I worked with when I was just like a developer in a DBA, Rita, and she came from a scientific background.
Mm.
So her approach to managing projects was almost like the scientific method. It might not have been the absolute best, but she was very structured and she paid attention to all the details, right? But yes, there's been, and even with the recent meltdown with the airline reservation systems, which I was caught up in. I had to like drive from like Memphis, Tennessee back to Ohio 9 hours. It gave me a lot of time to think about things. But even today, right, we have technology fall downs
Mm.
that got to be turned around. The F-35 A-list program is kind of like another example, but it never goes away, right? So I think
Right.
it's good if you can get on a turnaround project. Those I tend to learn the most about. So
Mm. Okay, awesome. One of the other things that you highlighted was James' belief in continuous learning, even for seasoned project managers, of course. Are there any advice that you would give to professionals who might, let's say, feel a bit too comfortable with their current level of knowledge or skill set?
yeah, absolutely, and that's going to be in three areas, and these are the
Mhm.
ones that always tend to like come up, right? So first of all, I think they. I have people ask me sometimes. I just need a general project manager,
Mhm.
generic project manager. I'm going, okay, that's a bit of a purple squirrel. I actually don't know what that is because we like to have, in my firm, we like to have project managers have exposure to business domains. so they
Mm.
can communicate effectively, especially when problems come up. So one of the things I'm a big fan of is it's an old telecom concept called the last 10 feet, right? You have to
Okay.
understand the last 10 feet in order to
Mm.
really get an idea of like what's going on. There was a guy that actually he went on to become chair of AT&T, and
Mm.
Stan used to go out in the call centers,
Wow.
and he was a executive, and they say, why is this guy here? He's going around and asking, how long does it take to provision a phone? How long does it take to, you know, give somebody a credit? So he wanted to see stuff firsthand. I learned a
Mm.
lot from that, right? And so
Wow.
I take my teams out. I've had them working in retail stores. I've had them working in banks. I've had them out on, you know, gas and petroleum pipelines. I've actually had them flying airliners,
Mm.
simulators, of course, right?
Wow.
But it gets everybody to understand what does the consumer or the guest or what have you really look at. And I think working backwards from that and getting domain experience is so key, because
Mm.
then you're able to communicate with with a lot of folks. I'll have a funny story at the end. I'll kind of save with this with a executive I was working at with a big telecom company, where I actually brought up my father. Right. I think the second thing one should do, because of the proliferation of cloud environments, you
Mm.
should go get some of the initial cloud certifications. So I've actually had three, and they
Wow.
come in handy, right? Because one big SAP migration we were on, it was just taking forever. Like the data was just moving like a turtle, right? And I was ready to speak up on the phone to say, I wonder if we let this cloud provider know we were actually doing a database load this weekend. And we didn't,
Mm.
because they had the database set up to journal and update all the indexes and whatnot. And it was
Mm.
just like taking forever. And I was about ready to hit unmute on my phone. And one of my colleagues brought up, oh, did anyone ever talk to these folks that were actually doing a migration? And they're like, no. And then the cloud
Mm.
provider said, oh my God, here, let me reset this. And it actually got done in like 2 hours. Right.
Wow.
So having, I think the cloud, the basic, the initial, like,
Mm.
AZ900 for Azure or Google Digital Leader, right, or AWS, I think that's really key, because you still have to manage that. Everyone thinks, oh, I
Mm.
moved to the cloud, I fire and forget, I'm like done. Right?
Mm.
No, it doesn't like work that way, right? I think the
Mm.
other area is if you can get training in like security fundamentals, particularly around Active Directory. I mean,
Mm.
that's part of the reason I don't have any hair left. So is that I always run into like problems these days, right?
Mm.
Doing go lives and migrations and whatnot. And I think it's not that you're going to be a security expert, but
Mhm.
that you're going to have the knowledge, to know what
Mm.
questions to ask, right? Is Active Directory all set up so when we fire up this new database, it's not going to shut everybody down?
Mm.
Yeah, there's been so many instances I've seen on projects, even big capital projects, where everything's like ready to go and somebody makes a security change at the last minute,
Mm.
and you can't open up an airport terminal
Right.
because nobody can log in, right? It's just stuff like that. So I think those are the three things. I think one of the great examples for me, kind of defining moment. Unfortunately, my dad and mother have like passed away, but my dad was a telecom engineer, right?
Mm.
Back in the day when there was electromechanical switching
Wow.
equipment, right? I didn't have
Mm.
trains. I had like telephone switches and like all this.
Mm.
And I remember I was in this meeting, and it was with a big telecom client, and this executive was saying, on this project, I need to have people that actually know how telecom
Mm.
works. And he would
There you
literally
go.
point his finger and go,
Mm.
what about you?
Mm.
What about you? What about you? And
Mm.
Richard got, Richard's a really, really great guy. He got to me, and I said, Richard, my dad worked on 5A crossbar at AT&T, which was the first electronic switching system. It was so
Wow.
big, sure.
Mhm.
It was in a truck trailer, right?
Wow.
Out in
Mm.
Colorado. And Richard just literally stopped. I thought I killed him. I thought he was going to fall over. He came over and he gave me a hug. He said, all right, somebody that actually knows telecom. I was like, yeah, I grew up around it. But again, I think getting the domain knowledge, understanding cloud is really good. And then
Mm.
again, the things that always vexes me when I ever do go live something like this, have to make sure all the security constructs, which are so important these days, right, to be in place and are effectively working, and nobody touches anything, a week before go live. So, but yeah, that's what I would encourage people to do. That'll make for a much
Mm.
richer project manager experience, I think.
Awesome. So, I mean, excellent answer there. A lot of takeaways for project managers in that. Um, I'd also like to ask, like, back to James. the early approach to project management. Do you
Yes.
think there is any tidbits there which can be critical for project managers of today as well? Anything
Oh,
based on
absolutely.
what he,
I'll
yeah.
tell you a story, James. I had James laughing so hard I thought he was going to cry. Right. So we did an internal survey a couple of years back, and we said, with all the new tools and agile and all this other stuff, what percent of things remain the same?
Hmm.
Right. And the answers that came back were actually surprising. They said, over the years, they said it's about 70 to 80% remains the same.
Wow.
Right. You can do
Hmm.
cyclical development and all this, right? But if you don't own the software code, like in a package, you're not going to
Hmm.
be able to do like a pure custom dev
Right.
agile,
Right. Love
model. It's
that.
going to be like a little bit different. But it was interesting. And then I had one person that actually was part of a kind of an agile firm, pure agile custom dev firm that we acquired. And he says, my answer, Kev, is 110%. And I was like, wow, that's a really interesting response, right?
Hmm.
And this fellow said, well, yeah, because if you can't get what you need to do right with waterfall, you're
Hmm.
going to crash 3 times as faster with agile.
Wow.
Right.
Love
And
that.
James
Hmm.
loved that part, right? So when James and I were talking, he would cover all the fundamentals. And I remember I was
Hmm.
going on stage. There had to be like over 100, maybe 150 project managers in this big auditorium. And I said, I have the easiest job at this whole seminar because
Hmm.
James already covered about 70% of what I need to talk about.
What I,
But he was very much in agreement with that. I think that there's
hmm.
common disciplines and the ability to kind of, capture issues and also be transparent, right? The
Hmm.
last thing you want to say as a project manager is, I feel green.
Hmm.
Or, another example might be, my SPI is 0.98 and you're talking to a bunch of,
Right.
equity traders. It's like,
Hmm.
they're not going to understand that, right? You have to do the so what, and you have to
Hmm.
be brave enough to raise your hand, right? That's
Love
really,
that.
really, really. But James, yeah,
Perfect.
James, it's amazing, Kev. The more things change, the more things stay the same.
They stay the same. Love it. Love it. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Kevin. I would have loved if we had more time, but maybe some other day.
Absolutely.
Uh, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And I'm sure the PMC Lounge community will truly appreciate and enjoy this insightful conversation. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. And everybody have a great weekend. Now I got to get back to like managing projects. But I'm glad I could bring that support.